Hello, heart-centered child and family practitioner. Welcome to Holding the Work, Reflections for Child and Family Practitioners. I'm Ashleigh, a children's therapist, social worker and supervisor. I created this podcast as a reflective space for practitioners working with children, parents and families. Whether you're a social worker, counsellor, play therapist, psychologist, case manager, or any other practitioner who works with children and families, this podcast is a place to pause, to think about the work and keep growing in ways that are ethical, trauma-informed, relational, and honours the people that we work with as well as you as a practitioner. I'm recording this episode of the podcast on Mulwina country in the Hobart area of Lutruwita, Tasmania. I acknowledge the Palawa peoples as the traditional owners of the country that I'm recording this episode on today, and I repay my respects to the elders past and present and express my gratitude for the knowledge, wisdom and lore that has been and continues to be shared with us on this country. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad that you're here and listening in to this episode of the podcast. So in this episode, I'd like to share a personal story with you. It's a story about moral distress and moral injury, and how we can stay aligned with our values through significant reform and change. So earlier this week, I have been in tears. I've spent some time, like everyone else who is working, particularly in private practice, with children, families, particularly in the NDIS space. I've been watching and waiting and learning more about this changing funding context for children with disabilities and families in Australia. So changes to the NDIS, the design of the Thriving Kids as the first phase of foundational supports, listening to ongoing conversations about which children will continue to access the NDIS, which children will be supported through other systems, and what will that actually look like in practice. There's a lot of commentary on social media. There's a lot of really concerning headlines in the media right now, and I'm not sure about you, but for me, it's starting to take a toll. Alongside all of this change, families are already experiencing increased costs of living, long wait lists. In the area that I live, so in Hobart, on nipaluna, there's really limited access to services, and I can imagine that would be quite similar to those in regional areas in Australia. So there's quite limited access to services in general, but even limited access to child-centered services. And families are also navigating and feeling the emotional load of trying to work out and navigate systems that are so confusing, fragmented, and exhausting. So all of this has had an impact on where I'm at with the therapeutic side of things, the therapy side of supports that I offer to children and families here at Children's Therapy Tasmania. But it has also had an impact on I guess, a personal lived experience side for me. And a lot of this commentary has really activated those thoughts and feelings and beliefs that I felt in the past, where I had been made to feel like I was the problem. So I'm really navigating this space with multiple different lenses at the moment, or that's what it feels like. So I was in tears because I had been feeling such deep conflict with my values and feeling such an enormous amount of guilt that I'm beginning to feel quite distressed. And I wanted to share this story because I have a very big feeling that I'm not the only one feeling this way, and I'd love to be able to share some knowledge and wisdom around how I'm navigating this season, and maybe share a couple of ideas around how you might be able to navigate it as well. So over the past 18 months, through my own therapy, my own personal work and professional work, I've done a lot to really get an understanding of what my values are. And for me, my personal and professional values are not separate at all. They're one and the same. And through this process, the values that I've landed on has been fairness, integrity, and being of service. So recently, I felt as though everything that I was doing, everything that I was responding to, everything that I was having to navigate was really pressing and conflicting with those values. And I have felt this sense of powerlessness. So the current NDIS reform landscape and the emerging design of thriving kids raise significant questions for those of us working with children and families. Thriving Kids has been described as a national system of supports for children aged 8 and under with developmental delay and or autism with low to moderate support needs, with rollout expected later on this year, which is 2026, and the full rollout being in 2028. And it's expected that children with permanent and significant disability will be still eligible to access the NDIS. You can find out more of that information on government websites, NDIS websites. So on paper, a system that identifies children's developmental needs earlier and supports families in places where children live, learn, and play can be really incredibly valuable. But in practice, there is still so much uncertainty. So what will these supports actually look like? Who will deliver them? How will children's developmental, relational, and mental health needs be understood? How will families continue to have choice and control? How will children with complex trauma histories and attachment disruptions, neurodevelopmental differences, how will they be supported in this new system? What happens when a child's needs are considered low to moderate by a system but feel insignificant and daily for a child, parent, or caregiver living with them? So all of these questions matter. All of these questions, I imagine, we've all thought of at some point during this process. So they matter because behind every policy phrase, there's a child. Behind every access change, there's a family trying to make the best decision that they can. Behind every funding reform, there are practitioners trying to work ethically within systems that are shifting beneath them. So when systems change, children and families feel it. When we talk about NDIS changes, service design, foundational supports, the language can become quite technical and abstract. So we talk about eligibility, access pathways, foundational supports, system sustainability, service models, low to moderate support needs, cost containment, all of those types of things. Children and families don't experience these changes as abstract policy. They experience them as uncertainty and stress. So some parents may wonder whether their child will still be able to access their therapy. A carer may worry about whether their child's trauma history will be understood within a developmental support model. A child may lose a trusted therapist because the funding pathway no longer supports that relationship. A family may be told that support will exist elsewhere, but not yet know where, when, how, or whether it will actually meet their child's needs. For some families, especially those who already had to fight so hard to be heard, this uncertainty can be deeply destabilizing. For practitioners, it can be heartbreaking to sit alongside these families with such uncertainty while we're also navigating this uncertainty ourselves and also the viability of our own services and practices. Many small therapy practices have been built around the current NDIS landscape. Many practitioners have supported their work around children and families who need responsive, relational, and developmentally informed support. When that landscape changes, practitioners are not simply making business decisions. We're making decisions that affect the therapeutic relationships, the continuity of care, access, safety, and trust. And this is where moral distress can begin to emerge. So many of us come into this type of work in the helping profession because we really care deeply and we want to help. We want children to have spaces where they can express themselves, process their experiences, and feel deeply understood. We want parents and carers to feel more confident, supported, and capable so they can keep meeting the needs of their children long after therapy has ended. We want to advocate for families when they feel voiceless in complex systems. We want to bring kindness, safety, and thoughtfulness into spaces that can sometimes feel rushed, understood, under-resourced, and overwhelming. And for many practitioners, this work isn't just a job. It's connected to our values, our histories, our hopes for children, and the kind of world that we want to contribute to. So what happens when our work starts to conflict with our values? Not necessarily our work, but the context of the systems and the situations that we're working in. When we're unable to act or practice in line with our values, or when we feel forced into decisions that really conflict with what we believe is right, we can experience what's called moral distress. So moral distress can occur when we know and strongly sense that the ethical and morally right action would be, but the institutional limitations, funding constraints, resource shortages, policies, power imbalances, and systemic barriers prevent us to be able to do. to do it or to act in that way. So for child and family practitioners, this might sound like, I know this child needs more support, but the funding isn't there. I know this family needs more flexible response, but the system doesn't allow for it. I know this parent is exhausted from navigating services, but I actually don't know where to send them next. I know this child needs relational safety and continuity, but the funding model doesn't protect that. I know this family needs help now, but the new system hasn't been created yet. I entered this work to help, but I feel like I'm participating in a system that is excluding others or failing people. In the NDIS and Thriving Kids context, moral distress may show up when we're trying to balance the child's needs, the family's financial reality, the limits of available funding, our professional obligations, our own business sustainability, and the uncertainty of what's coming next. It may show up when language used in reform doesn't match the complexity of what we're seeing in practice. A child may be described as having low to moderate support needs, but that child may still experience intense distress, school refusal, communication differences, sensory overwhelm, developmental vulnerability, family stress, the impacts of trauma, and significant relational needs. A family may be told that support will be available through everyday settings, but those everyday settings may already be significantly under-resourced, stretched, or even unsure how to respond. A practitioner may believe strongly in inclusion, early support, and child-centered and family-centered practice, while also worrying about the implementation of reform that may leave children and families without the depth, consistency, or relational care that they need. So those tensions are not just administrative, those tensions are ethical, and over time, holding all of that can become incredibly distressing. So moral distress can show up emotionally, physically, psychologically, and spiritually. It can feel like feelings of anger, frustration, and helplessness. It can feel like feelings of guilt and shame. There's a whole lot of grief there and deep sadness about what children and families are being asked to carry. It can feel like hopelessness about systems that do not seem to honour the complexity of people's lives. Physically, it can show up as fatigue, ongoing exhaustion, sleep difficulties, tension, pain in the body, nausea, a racing heart, and a sense of being constantly braced. And certainly when I connect back into my body, I can feel like I'm in a constant state of tension. I feel like I'm constantly bracing for something, and it's quite difficult for me to relax. But when moral distress is prolonged, repeated, and unresolved, it can contribute to what's called moral injury. So moral injury refers to the deeper, more enduring psychological, social, and spiritual impact that can occur when we're involved in, witness, or fail to prevent or feel subject to actions that violate our deeply held moral beliefs or ethical values. A moral injury is increasingly discussed in healthcare and in helping professions, particularly when workers are repeatedly exposed to ethically distressing situations within stretched and constrained systems. So moral injury isn't the same as burnout, but burnout and moral injury can overlap. So burnout often asks, how long have I been carrying too much? Moral distress asks, what am I being asked to participate in that conflicts with what I believe is right? And moral injury asks, what has this done to my sense of self, meaning, trust, integrity, and sense of hope? So those distinctions matter because many of us as practitioners are not simply tired, but we're ethically or morally distressed. So how does moral distress, the NDIS and Thriving Kids landscape interconnect? So what I'm noticing lately and what I'm experiencing, I do believe that therapists who are working in the NDIS space and in the early intervention space may be at higher risk of experiencing moral distress during this period of reform and change. I've been feeling quite concerned, hence why I've been thinking about, okay, what can I do to help, to be of service? Hence why I've put this podcast episode together. So I'm hoping that it might resonate with someone. The proposed changes sit at the intersection of disability rights, children's development, family wellbeing, service access, practitioner sustainability, government policy, and government cost management. So Thriving Kids is intended to provide earlier support for children aged 8 and under with developmental delay or low to autistic children with low to moderate support needs. And the Australian government has communicated that these services are designed to help children access support earlier in settings that they are accessing every day. So these are parts of a vision that many of us might actually agree with. Children shouldn't have to wait until difficulties become so severe before receiving support. Families should be able to access trusted information, guidance, and practical help earlier. Support should be available in the environment where children live, learn, and play. But the distress comes from the gap between the vision and the current uncertainty or the reality of what's actually happening in practice in day to day. A system can use words like child-centered, family-centered, strengths-based, evidence-informed, but those words need to be lived in the design. They need to be visible in funding, in workforce planning, in access pathways, in rural and regional availability, in cultural safety, in parent choice, in the recognition that children's needs are relational, developmental, sensory, emotional, social, and systemic. And for me, this current landscape of the NDIS and Thriving Kids has led me to ask questions like, where are the children's rights in these decisions? Where are the child's voice? Where is the child's voice? Where is the recognition that families need time, trust, consistency, and support? Where is the understanding that therapy is not just a service item, but often a relationship that has taken time to build? Where is the recognition that parents and carers are already carrying so much, where does this leave children who do not fit neatly into these categories? And where does this leave practitioners who have built ethical, relational, and responsive services around the needs of children and families? These are not easy questions, and they may not be neat answers to these questions. But I do think that we need to acknowledge and name the emotional and ethical weight of this moment that we're experiencing right now. So in this episode of the podcast, I wanted to share perhaps 3 ways that we can support ourselves when we're experiencing emotional distress, or we're experiencing challenge and uncertainty during this time of significant change and redesign. I wanted to share a couple of ideas, 3 different ways, but I just would like to make it quite clear that there is no 3-step solution to moral distress or moral injury. And I also want to make it clear that I don't want to suggest that individual self-care can resolve what it is that we're feeling, and the systemic, or what's happening systemically, and the systemic harm that's possibly occurring or may likely to occur. That's not what I'm suggesting here. But what I do in these suggestions, I do think there are ways that we can support ourselves to stay grounded, reflective, and values aligned while we're navigating such difficult terrain and circumstances. So the first offering is focus on what you can do and how you are practicing in alignment with your values. So when wider systems feel overwhelming, it can be really helpful to return to your circle of control and circle of influence. So what is it that can you control? What can you influence? What decisions are yours to make, and what decisions are for others to make? What values can still guide you in this terrain, in this season? What is the most ethical, fair, and compassionate options available within the constraints that you're working in or facing? So for me, my values of fairness, integrity, and being of service have really become anchors. They haven't made the decisions that I've had to make easy, but they've shaped how I've wanted to approach them. So when I've needed to make changes to my for therapy availability, I felt I needed to balance fairness to the children and families that I work with, as well as towards myself as well. So for me, I really wanted to communicate with families in a way that was fair and done with integrity. I wanted to give families as much notice as possible that I have had, that I'm intending to take a pause from direct child therapy work and focus my attention elsewhere for a little while. So doing it this way has allowed us time to offer a proper closure to some children and support referrals to other services when needed. And it's also given us time to slow down and maybe change direction or shift gears a little bit. So was this approach perfect? No. Did it remove the grief and the guilt and discomfort that I felt? No. But it has allowed me to act in a way that feels more aligned with my values, even within circumstances that I have absolutely no control over. So just for your information, if you're curious, for the time being, I have chosen to move into a hybrid space. So at the time of recording this podcast episode, I have been working in a private practice full time. So now I'm just shifting away a little bit, working part-time private practice and part-time in employment. And I've moved into a role where I feel I can really transfer my skills, take it as an opportunity to grow and develop new ones, and continue practicing in a way that does align with my values. And I'm moving into a space that I'm really quite excited about, and I'm really excited to bring in that trauma responsive, what I know now about trauma and trauma responsive practice. I'm really looking forward to building my skills in that area, but also sharing what it is that I've learned with you on the podcast as well. So sometimes values aligned practice doesn't look like staying exactly where you are. Sometimes it looks like adapting, grieving, communicating clearly, advocating where you can, and sometimes it looks like being honest about what we can and cannot hold. So the second offering I have for you is to keep children and families at the centre of your decision making. So when systems are changing quickly, it can be easy for us as practitioners to get pulled into survival mode. When we think about policy updates, we might be thinking of the viability of our businesses or practices, referral pathways, funding rules, wait lists, capacity, income, sustainability, all of those types of things. All of those types of things, like, they matter, but on the other end of that, we have children and families that we work with. So one way to stay connected to our values is to keep returning to the child and the family in front of us. So we can consider questions like, what does this child need to understand about the changes that are happening around them? How can we support the parent or the carer to feel less alone in this? What information can we provide clearly and compassionately? What choices are still available for this family? What does transition planning look like, and what is needed? What relationships, routines, and supports can be protected here? Where might advocacy be appropriate? And how can we communicate uncertainty without adding extra stress and worry and fear? In a changing NDIS and thriving kids landscape, children and families need more than information. They need transparency, warmth, time to process, practitioners who can be honest without being hopeless, and they need support to make sense of what is changing and what it may mean for them. So this is where values-led practice matters. We may not be able to control the policy environment, but we can still choose how we communicate, how we transition, how we advocate, how we document, how we collaborate, and how we hold the dignity of children and families in the process. My last offering is around intentionally using supervision as a safeguard. So supervision can be an important safeguard when we're experiencing moral distress as practitioners. not because supervision removes any of the systemic pressure, but because it can give us a space to think, feel, reflect, and make meaning with another person. A good supervision space can help us notice signs of moral distress before they become more entrenched, a bigger issue. So before it moves into that moral injury space. Supervision can help us to reflect and ask questions like, what is this situation bringing up for us? Where do I feel caught or compromised? What values feel threatened here? What is within my responsibility and what is not mine to carry alone? How can I respond ethically within the limits of the system that I'm working with and within? How does this child and family, what does this child or family need from me right now? And where might I need to advocate, consult, or pause? Supervision can also offer perspective, reassurance, and some much needed co-regulation. When we are distressed, our nervous system can really narrow our view. We may move into urgency, self-doubt, shame, helplessness, and having a reflective space where someone can slow down with us, help us breathe, and support us to think clearly can be deeply protective. Can be protective for us as practitioners, but also protective for the kids and the families that we work with. So for practitioners working with children and families, supervision is not only about case direction or our therapy skills, it's also about sustainability, ethical practice, values alignment, navigating systems, professional identity, and staying connected to ourselves in the work. But sometimes moral distress becomes long-lasting and begins to move into moral injury. And the impact of that isn't something that supervision can hold alone. So if you're noticing ongoing distress, intrusive thoughts, deep feelings of shame, persistent grief, emotional numbness, disruptions to your sleep, physical symptoms, feelings of hopelessness or helplessness, or a sense that you're no longer yourself, it may be important to seek professional support from a mental health professional. So therapy such as acceptance and commitment therapy can be really helpful because they can support people to reconnect with their values and make space for those really painful internal experiences that you're experiencing, but also help you take committed action in ways that feel aligned and matter. And there'll be other therapeutic approaches as well that can be really useful depending on your experiences, your history, and the symptoms that you're experiencing. So I just want to let you know that seeking support isn't a sign that you're not coping. It's a sign that you've been carrying too much for too long in systems that have not adequately supported you. So if you're a child therapist, practitioner, supervisor, a service provider, working with kids and families and really feeling the weight of the current NDIS and Thriving Kids landscape, I really want to say this gently. Your distress may be telling you something important. It may be pointing to your values, pointing to the limits of the system, pointing to your care for children and families, pointing to the places where advocacy is still needed, and pointing to where you need support, rest, clarity, or change. Moral distress is not something that we need to dismiss, ignore, push through. It's something that we can listen to. Not so it consumes us, but so it helps us to return to the questions that matter. How do we keep children and families at the centre? How do we practice with fairness, integrity, and being of service, even within uncertainty? How do we make ethical decisions when the system around us is changing? And how do we make sure we're not trying to hold these questions alone? If you're feeling like this too, or would like to support navigating this season of change with these questions in mind, please do reach out and connect. I offer heart-centered and value-based supervision to practitioners who work with children and families in various different contexts. And I'd love to be here to support you through this season of change that we find ourselves in. Until next time, take care.